All right, Judges. In Judges 1 through 11, what stood out to you? Probably some things in there that you don't remember ever reading before, I would imagine.
They were kind of ruthless.
They were ruthless, yeah. Book of Judges is full of all kinds of interesting things, some very bloody things, a lot of intrigue, mystery, murder, all the kind of stuff that young men like to read about.
Remember they would have like a really good ruler, and then that person died. They were all for God when the ruler was alive, then right after he died, just went back to
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. That happens over and over again in the Book of Judges in a little while. Good observation. What else?
Were the judges like kings, or were they just?
No, they were people that God rose up to take care of a problem. Mostly it was a problem of an invading the tribe that came in and had taken over, and the people cried out to God. And so he sent somebody to almost rule over the people, but mostly to get rid of the enemy. So they were kind of looked, many of them at least, were looked upon as kind of like a ruler. But I think there was one instance where they tried to make Gideon king, wasn't it? Did you read about Gideon yet? Was he in there? 1 through 11? I can't remember what chapter he's in. He might be chapter 12. But they tried to make him king, and so they had that idea. But they were not kings.
Were judges like prophets?
They were kind of like prophets in that, not all of them, but some of them did tell the people what the Lord wanted. But mostly they were just people that God sent to take care of a problem. And I said that before, and that's about the best way I can think of explaining it. Anybody else stand out? Any of the judges or anything that was going on? No? Okay, well let's look in our notes then. We'll find out some more about the judges as we go along here. Remember that we have been looking at the entrance of Israel into the land of Canaan. We have them becoming established as the 12 tribes. Now they didn't conquer all the land initially, but they settled on these borders. And we've talked yesterday about the different tribes that were in the land of Canaan that they had to drive out. Today we want to look at the tribes that were outside the land that present problems for them. In fact, it's some of these people that are the ones invading during the time of Judges that a judge is sent to drive back out. And you may recognize these as we go along. All right, so first of all, we have the Moabites. They are east of the land of Canaan. If you look back on the map, see Moab is over here. So they oftentimes came around this way or up attacking Reuben, but they came into the land. Who are the Moabites? Their ancestor is Moab, as you might expect. What brought Moab into the world? Does anybody know? Who was Moab's father?
Ishmael?
No? It's a good guess. It's about the same time. Not a son of Abraham, but a nephew of Abraham. Lot. Okay? So was he the son of Lot and his wife?
No, his daughter.
His daughter. Yeah. After Sodom was destroyed, remember, Lot's wife looked back, longing for what she was leaving behind, was turned into a pillar of salt. Lot and his two daughters hid in a cave, and the daughters became, I don't know if they thought that the whole world had ended, maybe, but they said, there's not a man left. How are we ever going to have any children? Well, we've got our father here. And so the oldest daughter got him drunk, got him to sleep with her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Moab. The other one did the same thing the next night, and she also became pregnant and gave birth to Ammon. So the Moabites, the Ammonites, perpetual enemies of Israel, came into existence because of the immoral acts of Lot's daughters with their own father. All right, so what do we know about the Moabites? Were they good neighbors? Well, they sacrificed children by burning. An important rite, let me quote, I'm reading a quote here. An important rite in the worship of Molech was, I forgot to say, they worshipped Molech. That was their main god, Molech. An important rite in the worship of Molech was the sacrificial burning of children. In excavations, an archaeologist found the ruins of a Canaanite temple. Inside, he discovered hundreds of urns containing the bones of children from 4 to 12 years old who had been burned alive. Another horrible practice along this line was called foundation sacrifice. This called for the slaughter of a child upon the construction of a house. Its body would then be stuffed into a wall to assume good luck to the remaining family. So that was their house dedication. They would kill one of their children and stuff it in a wall. That was supposed to bring them good luck.
Do they burn like the firstborn of every family? Do they have like a certain child that they would burn?
I think the one that they liked the least. No, it may have been the firstborn. That would have been kind of the way things usually were done. But I don't know for certain about that. I do know that the way they did it was the god Molech, and we'll see the same thing is true of the Ammonites with, I'm sorry, the Moabites is Chemosh. The Ammonites is Molech. They had an idol made out of metal, and the god had his arms outstretched, and there was an empty spot in his belly, and they would build a fire in his belly, and then the metal conducts heat, and the metal would all heat up, and when it was nice and hot, they would lay the child in his arms, and he would burn alive.
If I were to burn someone alive, which I probably won't, but
Let's hope not. If you ever feel the urge, make sure you let us know, okay? All right, go ahead.
if I were to do that, why don't the bones burn too?
Good question. And I wouldn't have known this if we hadn't cremated my sister-in-law a couple years ago. The undertaker told us all about cremation. He said when they cremate a body, that's very hot, hotter than probably they could make these idols. The bones don't burn. Once the body is cremated, they have to take the bones out and actually pulverize them so that they can put the ashes in a box for you. So, good question. Yeah. Are we going to get into burning questions now? What? Go ahead.
Would they like tie the kids onto his hands so they can burn them?
I think the ropes would burn. Yeah, I did say that up to 12 years old. So I'm not sure. I think normally once they're laying, the arms are constructed so they're not going to fall off. If it was an older child, I'm not sure how they would keep them on there. Because if you put ropes, the ropes would just burn. Maybe they knocked them out first. I don't know.
But since the hands are really hot and you put the kid on, wouldn't you just melt instead of burn? Because there's no flame, it's just metal, so wouldn't you just like...
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert at this by any means. But I would think that possibly, if you have something really hot and you lay something that's combustible on it, it catches fire. So I don't know, but maybe the body just catches on fire. I'm just guessing at that because, like I said, I'm not very experienced at this, and I've not read anything that describes it in that much detail. What I gave you is as much detail as I have and that I want, I think. Brenna?
Would each family be required to sacrifice one child?
I don't know whether it was required, how often, whether it was just in times of crisis, probably before planting for a good crop. I would imagine that would be a good time of year. If there was a drought, maybe, okay, people, let's step it up here. Riley.
Do you think they like to watch the child burn? Like,
So
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah, it was part of what the community did.
what something like really bad happened and like all the families offered the children that there would be no one left?
Oh, you can always have more. Okay,
If I put my arm on a stove, a hot stove, would it burn right? Would it burn through my bone?
Try.
through your bone, no,
Yes.
just your flesh, your muscles, but not your bone. Do not try this at home. I'm a little disturbed by some of the questions here. All right, so let's get back to the Moabites. They worship Chemosh or Chemosh through burning children and sacrifice. They also had a fertility cult with prostitution. In other words, they believed that one way to worship God was to have women prostitutes at the temple and the men would go and have sex with them. That was worshiping God. And we saw that with the Canaanite tribes too. And then the Ammonites were just as bad. They worshiped Molech, but they did the same things. They burned children in sacrifice as well. All right. Now they are, as you can see here and here, and so they're right on the border, and they constantly invade from the east. And you find, especially in the first part of Judges, that they're the ones that are causing the trouble.
Why didn't the Israelites take more territory?
Why didn't the Israelites take more? Some would say, why did they take so much? You know, you could go either way on that. This is all they could control with the amount of people that they had. You know, if you say, okay, our tribe is going to be in control of a certain amount of land, but you don't have enough people to live on that, then you're not going to keep it anyway. Probably.
Who would start like the burning of kids?
Well, ultimately Satan.
Like why?
But why they would do that?
Who along the line would do that?
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder what kind of sadistic person first thought that up. But there are a lot of things like that that we wonder about. How can people do the things they do?
So like, people just like with all the jobs they do, they just do that to make these gods.
You know, if you don't understand the one true God, if you don't worship the one true God, you can imagine all kinds of things that your other gods might want. And what's more precious than your child? You say, well, I mean, even God, Yahweh God of Israel, required a sacrifice of the oldest child. He just allowed them to make a payment instead of actually killing the child. So that was a pretty common way of looking at giving your best to your God. Now, that doesn't take away the awfulness of what they did, but I'm just trying to show you that the original thinking may not have been so bad. It's just they took it to a level which was way beyond what they should have done.
do you think that the children went to hell?
Let's not get into that. Okay, that's another subject for another time. All right, let's talk about. We did that. Let's talk about the time of the judges then, which relate to these invasions from Ammon and Moab. I'm going to quickly go through all the judges here, and then we'll come back and talk specifically about a few of them. So this is the time of the judges. It's between Joshua's death and the coronation of King Saul. It's an era of frightful social, religious chaos, moral and spiritual declivity. That means spiritually they were going downhill fast. And we'll look at that in a moment. The book of Judges teems with violent invasions, apostate religion, unchecked lawlessness, and tribal civil war. Kind of adventure reading that some of you might like. All right, so the judges of Israel, you can see by all the names on here, cover most of Israel. So throughout almost 300 years, they're all over the place. They weren't just in one area. And so there's the entire extent. So we start with Othniel. And from Othniel, the next judge then is Ehud and Deborah. Ehud, they're separate. And Shamgar. Go to Barak, who actually is associated with Deborah. Gideon, Tola, Yair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. And you've probably heard of a few of those. You've probably no one here that's heard of all of them, I would imagine. So some of them take up very little space in the book of Judges. Some of them, like Samson, take up a lot of space. Gideon takes up a lot of space. And pretty interesting stories. Now here's something I want you to write out to the side of where you have the Moabites and the Ammonites about the book of Judges. And that is simply, you don't have to write down everything. But I just want to get the idea that things happen in cycles in the book of Judges. So the prosperity of the people living in Canaan is such that they become self-reliant. You know, and that's what happens when people become prosperous, become self-reliant, and so they forget the Lord. Then they move from being self-reliant to forsaking the Lord entirely. And then God brings distress upon them. He brings trouble. He allows an invading army to come in and take over, to wake them up. And so then they cry out to God for deliverance. God raises up a deliverer called a judge, and that judge delivers them, drives out the invaders, and then they come have a time where they're thankful, there's peace in the land, but eventually they get back to being self-reliant again, forgetting the Lord, and they repeat the cycle all over. I believe there's 7 times in the book of Judges they go through this cycle. Okay? Right. Okay?
What does the bottom right corner say?
Did somebody read that?
God brought trouble. Trouble.
You know, like the word.
Distress.
No one's able to read that? Let's see. God brought trouble. This one?
Please
God brought trouble.
say cry out.
The people will cry out. They cry out to God. God, deliver us. Help us. We're sorry. And then he would raise up a deliverer or a judge. Now, one thing we also need to understand is the key phrase to describe the people during this time of the judges.
Fickle?
Hmm?
Fickle? That's all I understand. People
I don't understand what you said.
they're fickle.
They're fickle. Yeah, they are. But there's a phrase in the book of Judges that's actually used to talk about how they are not trusting in God, not following God. It says there that every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's it. Jake got it. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. So everyone became really a God to himself. Everyone did what he thought was right. They weren't following what God said. Now remember, what kind of government were they supposed to have as they came into the land of Israel?
Theocracy.
A theocracy. God ruling. Was God ruling during the time of Judges? No, each man was ruling himself. It reminds me of the secular humanism of today, where secular humanism teaches every man determines truth for himself. And that's what they were doing in the time of Judges.
Was Egypt technically a theocracy because Pharaoh
Pharaoh.
was considered God?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. I suppose you could call it that. Good observation. Okay, let's talk about some of the judges. First of all, do you know who this is?
Gideon.
Yeah, how do you know it's Gideon?
The horn.
Yeah, he's got a horn he's blowing, and you got the torches that were hidden in the land, and the jars that were broken. Remember, and he drove out. I think it was the Midianites, wasn't it? The Gideon. If you haven't read this, I don't think this was in the reading. Was it in the reading for today? Was it chapter 8?
Yeah.
All right, so you did read about Gideon and how God said, "You got too many men." Can you imagine that? Saying to a military commander, "No, you've got too many men. You need to pare it down because you're fighting against a huge force. You need less men." And of course, how the Midianites got confused when all the jars were broken, all of a sudden all these torches appear and the trumpets are blaring, because normally that would mean, one person in a whole company would be doing that. And there might be 100 or hundreds of people for every one of those. And there's 300 of those guys doing that. So they're calculating immediately in their minds, how many soldiers are out there? We've got to get out of here. And they start fighting one against one another because they don't know where the enemy is. So very, very interesting, very cool thing that God does there. Okay, here's one of my favorite judges, Ehud. Do you remember Ehud?
Was he the one that stabbed
The Fat King, yeah, Eglon, I think was his name.
Oh, yeah.
Ehud was a left-handed Benjamite, and he was able to sneak into or actually be introduced into the king's quarters because they checked him as if he was right-handed where his weapon would be, but because he was left-handed, it was on the other side. And I remember as a junior high kid reading this and thinking, how cool. Ehud sticks the knife into the king's belly, and he's so fat that it covers up the whole handle of the knife, and then he sneaks out. And, people come calling, trying to find the king, and they don't know why he's not responding. They think maybe he's going to the bathroom or something, and they finally break in. So a couple of very interesting judges there. We'll talk about another one here in a minute. But the people we talked about, the Moabites and the Ammonites, are on the east side of Israel. There are another people that come on the west side that we've already been introduced to when we talked about Egypt, and that are the Philistines or the Sea Peoples. Remember, we said that the Sea Peoples came. Some think they originated in Crete and came down, but I think better scholarship indicates maybe they were living on Cyprus. Now, originally they were from up in here. It looks like. Came down to Cyprus and then invaded Egypt. We don't know why they left there, why they came there. But they came down to Egypt, remember, were repulsed by Ramses II, and then they came up to live along the coast here. And that's how they arrived. Well, once they arrived, they start pushing inland. So Israel has captured much of the land of Canaan, but not all the way to the coast. The Philistines land, and they start pushing in. And so they become the great enemy of Israel. Here's another indication of them coming from Cyprus, being repulsed, and then coming over here to live. These people are Hamites. They're descendants of Ham, just like the Egyptians, and so they're very dark skinned. They are through his second son Mizraim, who is also the father of the Egyptians. So they are related. Maybe that's why they came down to Egypt. They thought maybe they could take over land from their relatives. In the Iliad, which was written by whom? Homer. Right, good. You guys all know that. He mentions a people called the Pelasgians, who were allies of Troy. And these are probably the Philistines. I think they are the ones that are mentioned fighting up here in Troy, up in Asia Minor. At the beginning of the Iliad, there is a story of pestilence, which is dealt with in a similar way as in 1 Samuel 5 and 6. So what they did then, they did again in 1 Samuel. Also, there's a similar story of Megaran, king of Nissus, who had a lock of red hair that gave him strength. His deceitful daughter, Scylla, shaved his lock and betrayed him to King Minos of Crete. You ever heard of King Minos? We'll talk about him when we get to Greece. So this is later on. And so it may be, and they also have a similar story to Goliath. The guy by the name of Eliates, who founded the Lydian Empire. And the description of Goliath's armor that we find in 1 Samuel is similar to Greek warriors in the Iliad. And so there seems to be such a similarity there that they probably are the same people. The battle of David and Goliath is similar in some respects to Hector and Achilles in the Iliad. Now, the similarity of these stories may indicate that Homer had heard about some of these things and incorporated them into his story of a more ancient time. So as we said, the Philistines settled along the coastal plains, and they formed a 5-city league called the Pentapolis. The Greeks called it that, which means 5 cities. It consisted of Gaza, which is right here, Ashdod up here, Ascalon, right here. Ekron is not on this map. And then lastly, Gath, which is here. So you can see that 5 cities in this area that were strongholds. A lord ruled each city. And as I said, these newcomers become Israel's most dangerous opponent. And by 1100, had pushed back Judah's border, back to here. You can see they've conquered all this area, and they're pushing back against Judah. And for a time, they virtually ruled Palestine. They even captured the Ark of the Covenant, and which we'll talk about in a moment, in the center of Israel's homeland. Now, the Philistine menace was greater at first because it was so insidious, deceitful. They didn't initially come in and start attacking like the Moabites and the Ammonites did. They replaced this with infiltration. So they came in and they said, you know, let's be friends. Let's marry one another's daughters. Let's trade together. And the Israelites, many of them fell for it. And they began to do that. So much so that they didn't think that the Philistines really were ruling over them so much as that they were their friends, their strong friends. And to the point where many of the Israelites resented Samson killing Philistines. I don't know if you remember that or if you've read that yet. When Samson was killing Philistines, a lot of people were getting mad at him. Why are you doing? They're our friends. We're married with, and Samson, of course, intermarried with a Philistine too. So that's the way they got in, was by doing those kind of things. Now, the main reason for their victory in battle was the possession of iron smelting, which they probably got from the Hittites. So they learned how to take iron ore and smelt it down and make hard metal out of it, of course, for spears and arrows and things like that. In fact, they had controlled the use of iron throughout the area, so that even among the Israelites, they were not allowed to make their own iron products or to have iron products except with permission of the Philistines. In addition to that, the Philistines also were the great boozers of their day. They consumed great quantities of barley beer. One interesting thing has been found among all these, the pottery and so on, they found a lot of very handsome mugs. You can tell somebody's really serious about drinking beer. They always have these really nice steins, maybe from Germany. And these guys had handsome mugs. And the interesting thing about it is that in the mouthpiece area, they actually had a filter fitted in there to keep the barley husks that might be floating on the home brew from being drunk. So they thought of everything. Okay, the religion of the Philistines centered around the god Dagon. Dagon was considered a grain god. They also worshipped Ashtaroth and Baal-zebub, but Dagon is the one that was the head. The Hebrew name Dagon means grain, but the dag by itself means fish. So even in Hebrew, there seems to be that combination. And you can see that as the Philistines come onto land, grain is more important, but they came from the sea originally, were fish. So they kept the fish part of their god in place, even as they call him the grain god, with the body of a fish. Dagon was the god who led his people in warfare, provided for the fertility of the land and populace, protected the territory from human and divine encroachment, and took special care of the royal family. More interestingly, Dagon kept contact with his people by means of prophetic communication. In other words, he would take over a professional prophet or even a non-professional, take over them, possess them, and then they would communicate to the people what Dagon was saying. They celebrated their victories in the house of their idols, including the house of Dagon, and often carried their gods into battle. In the Bible, we see that Shamgar and Samson fought with the Philistines, and they were eventually driven back to the coast by Samuel. Jonathan defeated them in battle. David fought with them. King Saul lost to them and was killed in the battle, but they were totally subjected by the time of Solomon. one of the major protagonists against the Philistines was Samson. And what vow had Samson taken a part in? The Nazirite vow, which meant what?
Don't cut your hair.
Don't cut your hair. Don't drink alcoholic beverages.
Don't touch carcasses.
Right, don't touch dead things. Don't touch dead bodies. Now, normally a Nazirite vow was only a temporary thing, a short time, but he was considered a Nazirite from his birth. And so he was not supposed to do all those things. And of course, being a good, godly man, he didn't do any of those things, did he?
He did.
What?
He did.
He did?
Yeah.
You mean he let his hair be cut?
Yeah. Let it. Well,
Well, he told Delilah.
he told her about it.
Yeah, that was how he had his strength. But he didn't touch any dead bodies, did he?
He
He
touched.
killed people.
He killed people. Yeah. Of course, they weren't dead before he touched them, I guess. He also killed a lion, and later came by and scooped honey out of its carcass. But at least he didn't drink alcoholic beverages, right? Except for that drinking party he had with the Philistines, where the whole thing was about drinking. So Samson violated every rule that he was supposed to keep as a Nazirite. And so God used him. Eventually, though, with his haircut, he was blinded by the Philistines as they captured him. And of course, they bring him into the temple of Dagon to make fun of him, because he had killed so many of them. They wanted to make fun of him. And he asked God to give him strength for one last act, and asked the servant to take him to the pillars in the middle of the temple, and he pushed them over. The whole temple collapsed on all the people that were there worshiping Dagon, and killed them all. And he killed more people in that one act than he had in his entire life. Question, Joel?
In that last picture where they're stabbing his eyes.
Yeah, they're using
Yeah, the guy.
sword,
Okay.
or that one. Yeah, yeah. And of course, these guys are dressed, because this was painted during the Middle Ages or the Renaissance period. These guys are dressed as Europeans, as they would have been. We don't know exactly how they did it. At least I don't. But they did blind him, poked out his eyes. Yeah, he couldn't see. That's why he had to ask the servant boy to direct him. Take me to the central pillars. Yeah. Okay, so look at the book of Judges. It is a death spiral. It goes down, 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 down. The book of Judges, as it progresses, there is, you know what, I think before we do that, we're going to run out of time. I'm going to take you back to Samson and Delilah, and I'll let you watch a song, and we'll pick up the rest of it if we can tomorrow.
Okay, I know that we have some younger people in the audience tonight. Some youth. No, shut your mouth. You're cute, but you're annoying. That's all I'll say. No, I'm just being serious. But I know we have some younger folk here, and I thought that it would be appropriate to have a Bible song. Do you know what the Bible is? It's a big book, and it's got stories and people in it, pages and maps. So I thought it would be great to do a Bible story about a Bible character from the Bible. Hey there, Delilah, this is your ex-boyfriend, Samson. Inside voices. And I know you thought that lifting weights made me so buff and handsome, you were wrong. It's 'cause I let my hair grow long. that makes me strong. Hey there, Delilah, you came in while I was sleeping, and I couldn't feel you cutting, and I didn't hear you creeping out the door. You left my hair piled on the floor. Well, I just snored. Oh, what you did to me.
Make sure you check the board for assignments for tomorrow. There's extra credit you can do for Thursday.
Oh, I'm a Nazarene, oh, but you shaved me clean. Delilah, you're so mean. I killed a lion, big and mean, and slaughtered many Philistines, all with the donkey's jawbone, that's no lie. But now I'm chained up to the wall, and I can't cry no tears at all, because they came and gouged out both my eyes. This is a Bible story. I'm not making this up. Why'd you grab your clipping shears and shave my head like Britney Spears? And now I'm standing here in total shame. People, that's stinking genius. What's wrong with you? Come on! Hey there, Delilah, why did you have to
You'll let him
see
play.
me?
So, go ahead.
Not long ago, I wanted you to be my bride, but you took too much off the side. There we go.
Is the extra credit too low?
When you died, just tell the devil I said hi. You'll know why. Oh, it's what you did to me. Oh, now I'm a creep. Oh, now I feel so weak. Oh, I was free.